Step into our weekly compilation of intriguing mysteries and thought-provoking discussions. Brace yourself for an intellectual journey that will challenge your perspectives and ignite your curiosity. So find a cozy spot, get ready to broaden your horizons, and come along as we venture into the realms of curiosity. If you're hungry for knowledge, remember to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up to show your support. Story 1. Well, I had surgery about 2 years ago, and apparently I started moving in the middle of it, trying to get up from the operating table. I was given general anesthesia. Apparently not enough, so they gave me extra. A lot extra. I was in recovery, and the nurse was trying to wake me up, and I was unresponsive. I guess they pumped me full of enough that my respiratory rate slowed down to the point where my O2 levels were low enough that organ failure was a serious risk. And the nurse was about to call the ambulance, since this was in a doctor's surgery suite in his office. I remember feeling incredibly at peace and feeling warm, as if I was floating. I was honestly the most comfortable I've ever been. The best way I can describe it is as if you wake up on a Saturday feeling rested and completely awake, yet you're so comfortable and at just the perfect temperature that you want to fall asleep for another hour, and you have no problem doing so. For your information, that never happens for me. Once I'm awake, that's it. 15 minutes extra. I won't be able to sleep no matter how much I want to. The nurse cracked open the ammonia salts under my nose to try and get a response from me. Nothing. She tried doing a sternal rub, grinding her knuckles into my sternum in my chest to the point that I had a large black and blue bruise afterwards. Over the next 2 to 3 hours, as the anesthesia wore off, more and more of my blood oxygen levels came up to normal levels, and eventually I was able to get up on my own and pee before they'd let me go home. For those wondering what happened, it was liposuction surgery, and right after I stood up, I was quoted by my ex-girlfriend saying at the time to the nurse, "I'm very upset with what the doctor did to me." The nurse said, "Oh my deity, what do you mean? What's wrong?" To which I replied, "I came in for breasts, and he gave me lipo instead." The nurse and my girlfriend laughed for the next 10 minutes while I continued shuffling across the bathroom to pee prior to releasing me to go home. Too long didn't read? Claimed I went in for surgery for boobs, and the doc gave me lipo instead, I'm a guy, and almost perished due to excess general anesthesia. Almost expiring was the most comfortable I've ever been. It's kind of amazing that this person was at ease when he was under that much anesthesia. I know what it's like to have your heartbeat slowed down to the point where you just don't really feel like you want to get up or anything, but why was he in there? Why did he think he was in there for breasts at all? And what did his girlfriend think of that? Story 2. I wasn't on the operating table, but I did expire. I had mono, and like my grandfather had just expired, and my parents had just gotten divorced, so I really downplayed how sick I felt for about 2 weeks. Then I was pretty much immediately hospitalized for another 2 weeks, and about 1 week in, through some kind of complication, I was 13, so this was 12 plus years ago, my spleen started rupturing. They decided to give me codeine or something with codeine in it. I told them I was allergic to it, but it wasn't on my charts. Honestly, I was alone and scared and knew my dad was allergic to it. I have a lot of his allergies. So they gave it to me anyway, thinking I didn't know what I was talking about. I don't remember this exchange that well. Either way, within about 15 minutes, it felt like my guts were being ripped out, and I remember at certain points losing the ability to control my screams, and that was pretty real. Insert morphine button. I don't know if any healthcare professionals are reading this and going, "What the hell," or not. And a lot of this I don't remember perfectly because it was a long time ago and I was terrified. But I assure you, there was a lot of what the hell. So now I've got this morphine button for the pain because my screaming was freaking everyone out, and things just started to fall away. I don't know how much longer later, but my dad finally showed up. He was upset. I didn't care about anything at that point and fell asleep. I woke up 18 hours later to a nurse trying to fix my IV that had just broken in my arm. Apparently, my heart rate dropped so low that I was technically unalive due to a combination of all the meds and some internal bleeding or something. They told me later that day while I was still in the hospital, which is a lot like the time I was stuck on the runway on Christmas Day because there was a problem with one of the engines and we had to change planes. Only there was no one in the airport to let us out of the plane, and so after an hour, they announced they'd fixed the engine problem and we were taking off. Having to hang out in the hospital where a mistake almost unalived me was like that flight. Spent the entire time scared and double-checking everything. My son had mono a couple of years ago, and he said that was the sickest he's ever been. Just sounds like all-around incompetence on this hospital overall. They don't even take into account histories. If the person says his dad has an allergy, wouldn't they think to maybe check or maybe just do something else just to be on the safe side? Really? Story 3. About 10 days after I had an appendectomy, I returned to the hospital in severe pain with high fever, nausea, and having spasms around my sphincter. They did all the tests, blah, blah, blah. Turns out I had a huge freaking abscess behind my uterus. I think that means to be abscess. I'm admitted to the hospital again, and that night I had the worst nausea. I spent several hours straight doing nothing but dry heaving. My stomach muscles were shot. I could barely breathe because my diaphragm was exhausted from it. That morning, they told me to drain the, again it says access, it's abscess. I'm sure it's abscess. What they were going to do was use a big old needle and shove it through the big butt muscle because they couldn't get to it any other way. Ugh. They couldn't get me sedated, though. At that point, I had an inkling that something was wrong. But I was so high on meds that I didn't care. Then 1 minute, I was in an x-ray room, I think, with them telling me that the PICC line was in. I don't know if that's PICC or PIC. I don't remember them putting it in or being moved to that room, but apparently I was conscious. Anyway, they bring me back, lie me down, and give me another shot of whatever they used. I remember snippets of what happened, like being on the gurney surrounded by the crash team, but nothing else. I woke up in the ICU 3 days later on my birthday. I never saw the surgeon again, nor did I ever see my original appendectomy surgeon again, but that's another story. After the initial "are you okay" thing, and I was too messed up to remember that. I don't remember what I found out exactly. I don't remember when I found out exactly what happened, or if they even told me, but I didn't care because I needed to worry about healing. It really hit me 2 days before I was released, 10 days after admission when a friend came to visit. But it wasn't emotional or anything like that. It was, hell, I almost expired, but I didn't. But I almost did. Oh, hey, morphine. It's hard now, though. It doesn't bother me that I almost expired because I didn't. It's the feeling helpless and hopeless, or remembering that feeling. This happened this June, so it's all pretty fresh. This one just sounds like this person is just floating into one state of consciousness or the other. And I don't know if it had anything to do with the appendectomy, but waking up in the ICU on your birthday, I guess it's kind of a birthday present, like, hey, you're still alive, but kind of a bummer that, hey, you got to celebrate in the ICU and maybe you can't have soda and cake. Story 4. I got my appendix out last fall. The surgery was supposed to be 45 minutes, home an hour later from the recovery room. When I woke up, I was in and out of sleep, asking for anti-nausea medication every time I woke up. I was told no each time. I promptly forgot that I was told no, fell asleep, woke up, and asked again. When I finally actually woke up, my mom told me that the surgeon had nicked a blood vessel and I'd been internally bleeding. So the surgery took 4 hours and I was back in my hospital room. They put some sensor massaging things on my legs to aid circulation, but at the time I was so drugged that I didn't even register it much. In the morning, my surgeon said that I'd been internally bleeding and they had to wait for it to stop, and that I'd be in the hospital for a few more days. I wasn't allowed to eat for 2.5 days after that, on top of the 24 hours prior. Before I was discharged 3 days later, the surgeon ordered an MRI to make sure I wasn't internally bleeding again. Once I was cleared, he said to me, "If you suddenly feel lightheaded or nauseated, call an ambulance immediately and tell them you're internally bleeding. If your legs or feet suddenly turn blue, call an ambulance and tell them you're losing circulation." That was the first time I really grasped that it had been a serious problem. A few weeks later, I asked my mom about what she'd done while she was waiting, and she mentioned that the surgeon had walked out and told her that I might expire, but he'd do everything he could. Too long didn't read? Surgeon kept me in the hospital for a few extra days and never directly told me how serious it was until I was discharged. If you suddenly feel lightheaded and nauseated, call an ambulance immediately and tell them you're internally bleeding. If your legs or feet suddenly turn blue, call an ambulance and tell them you're losing circulation. You would think that would mean you need to stay a few extra days. Story 1. I had the reverse sort of experience at my local supermarket. I live in Australia, and we have right-hand drive cars. I'm just finishing my shop when a huge American-looking SUV pulls awkwardly into the car park, and it's clearly left-hand drive and maybe 10 years old. I like cars, so I'm curious about it, and that's when I noticed it's got U.S. plates on it. Now, these aren't some novelty or limited edition Aussie plates that look American. These seem to be genuine U.S. plates. They had a state on them. Can't remember which one, but it was like Michigan or something. Obviously American. Middle-aged woman gets out, looking like it's a normal day at the shops. So far, the story is a bit weird, but nothing too unusual. But as I take my trolley back to the trolley bay, she's there and having obvious problems working out how to unlock one. You have to put a coin in them, and she's clearly having troubles, so I ask if I can help. She's trying to put what I later find out is a quarter in the trolley, saying she's never seen this sort of thing before. I show her the dollar coin I've just gotten back from my trolley. It's gold-colored, and she genuinely is weirded out by the color and is incredulous when I tell her it's $1. I feel like I'm an alien showing her a new type of cat or something. I put my dollar in the trolley lock and open it for her because she's clearly lost and I wanted to be helpful. She then sort of gets into a, "Oh, I know this" interaction and says, "Let me give you some money," and opens her purse. It's all American notes. Trust me, there's no good old Aussie plastic multicolored Monopoly money in this thing. I sort of blurted out, "Do you not have Australian money yet?" thinking that's going to slow you down in the Aldi they love. Her reply was, "No, why would I?" And she gave me the quarter she was trying to put in the trolley. I tell her it's not necessary, but she thanks me in her wonderful American accent and wanders off into the shop. It was hilarious and weird. If you'd shown me a portal from my shops to Michigan that she blundered through, it would have made complete sense. I got the impression she had almost no idea she was in another country. She was acting like I was the weird one. But she also spoke perfectly and was really nice, so it's not like she was in any obvious mental health episode. The fact that I have the quarter is the only reason I don't think I've hallucinated the whole thing after eating a dodgy pizza. Friends think her husband had gotten a job in Australia and just got the car and everything, etc. shipped, and maybe she's never been overseas before. It was super weird, and I love that woman so much. I wish I could find her again to see what she's doing now. I've also been in a country town where literally everyone we saw for the half hour we were there looked like they were from the same family, and everyone stared at us like they knew we were from out of town. But that has a very logical but no less creepy explanation. Okay, this one is so weird. What? She either fell through a portal and ended up on the other side of the planet with her SUV, or she legit doesn't know she's in Australia, and I don't know which explanation I prefer. I hope you get to meet her again. I'm also wondering if someone is rich enough to have a car shipped to Australia complete with the plates. And also, how do the laws work there? Was she allowed to drive in Australia with U.S. plates? Was she entitled, thinking that maybe since everyone in Australia speaks English, then American money is still going to work and American laws are still going to work? Hopefully she didn't get into any dodgy illegal situations. Story 2. My boyfriend and I stay in Melbourne for a few nights. Again, Australia. First Airbnb was practically a small hotel room, so all good. The second, on the other hand, it was advertised as flexible check-in, but the owner wouldn't stop pestering us for a time we were going to be there. We told them 8 p.m., and they still kept asking before saying they had to go out, and Frank would let us in. We had no mention of this guy before then, but fine, whatever. We ended up missing a few small shows we were eager to go to, so we'd get there earlier, and despite being promised off-the-street parking, we could only park on the street. It sucked, but no big deal. We'd had a long day and were pretty tired. Then we got to the house. Frank is this tall, thin, muscled older guy, really intense, and absolutely no chill. Bulging eyes are kind of intense. We were both really uncomfortable from the start, but my boyfriend makes small talk, jokes about Sydney versus Melbourne. This guy doesn't like it. To the point where he stopped walking, swung around, and got in my boyfriend's face. Boyfriend de-escalated the situation real quick, and we got to our room and immediately locked the door. We both got some bad vibes off the place and the guy, but we couldn't work out why. We thought we were just tired, but kept debating the pros and cons of staying, and the room wasn't helping. It was freshly painted, and the fumes were so strong I was getting a migraine. There was a door to the backyard that was blocked off with a dresser, so much dust under the bed it was ridiculous. And then we noticed 2 things. One was the wooden plank holding up the curtains. It was a big, thick, heavy-looking thing, and it was held onto the wall by a nail on each side. Half of it had already learnt right off the wall. That's what's tripping me up. I'm not sure if that's right, leaving a huge gap. This was right above the head of the bed. That was it for my boyfriend. He wanted out. The second point was my big thing. The door to the rest of the house had a lock, but there was also a gap between it and the floor. I'm not talking about a small space for air. I'm not talking about a finger underneath. I'm talking big enough for tall, muscly, big guy Frank to fit his entire arm under. We grabbed our things and snuck out. Went to the nearest grocery store for supplies, stopped around for a place to stay, let Airbnb know we'd left, and ended up driving through the night back to NSW and slept in the car for a few hours. Nothing exciting happened, but we just really didn't feel safe there. My boyfriend hikes a lot overseas, stays in random and/or deserted places. He's not put off easily. We were both pretty glad for a solid reason to leave. Bates Motel. Yeah, I'm pretty sure if they would have checked further, they would have found some sort of hidden camera. And I've just never seen a door that had that big of a gap underneath. I think it was big enough, it feels like it was big enough for that big tall guy to be able to just reach up under and unlock the door. I don't think he was giving any quarter, and he might have felt like things were Really, he might have taken any offense at any type of behavior to get into their space. Story 3. I used to live in southern Africa, and we did charity work for a lot of very remote rural areas. And when I say remote, I mean several hours of rough driving on roads that can barely be called roads. Many times we would come across settlements that were not on any map, just a collection of cinder block and mud houses, sometimes well off the road. Usually, these were what we called working villages, as in there is some work site, maybe a small brickwork or farm or something like that nearby. Though when I say near the workers, could be walking an hour or so to where they need to be. When we would stumble upon places like this, we would stop, find coordinates and landmarks, make some records, and pass it along back to our office. One day, we were working in the area near the borders of South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and we saw some smoke well off the road. Thinking it may be a village, we decided to go off-road and take a look. It was fairly well hidden behind a small hill, and from the road, you would have never known it was there if it were not for the column of smoke on the horizon. We get to it, and sure enough, it looks like one of those unmarked working villages, maybe 10 or so huts. But something seemed very off. It took a second, and we realized that there was no one around, and yet it seemed as if whoever lived there was there only moments before. We headed to where the smoke came from, and it was a large bonfire. When we looked closer, we noticed bones in it. Goat and cattle bones. Other than the sound of the fire, there was not a peep from anything else. Once I stepped out of our truck to get a closer look, I had this overwhelming sense that I was being watched from afar, and that I was not welcomed here. The other guys in the truck said they felt the same, and that we needed to go. So we did. A couple of weeks later, when we were driving back, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided I wanted to check the site again. This time, however, the village was stripped bare. Anything that could be taken was gone. All that was left was the shells of the huts and a black patch of ash where the fire was. There was one thing that was still there, though: the sense of being watched. We didn't stay any longer and never went back. You were being watched. They saw your vehicle coming and cleared out and hid. Don't know what they were up to or why they were so entrusting, but I feel confident that's the case. For me, with my video game-addled brain, I'm thinking of it like Minecraft, that they ran across a village, but the people there, the natives, were just too afraid to interact with you and went off somewhere. I've got deer where I'm staying right now that are like that. They'll stay where they are until they see you coming, and then they'll bolt off, waiting for you to disappear. Story 1. Not a cop story, but I guess I was definitely suspicious. I had just moved into a new apartment, and I had no tools. So I decided that during my lunch break, I would go to Home Depot, buy a hammer so I could finally hang some frames, and grab a quick lunch in the food court. Home Depot is inside the mall. Long story short, my country had just gotten rid of plastic bags that week, so of course, that's how I ended up walking around a big crowded mall with a hammer in my hand and nothing else. It was a quick thing, so I didn't bring a backpack, and before this point, I never noticed the lack of packaging on hammers. Of course, people start staring, and somebody tells one of the mall security guards about me. The guard stops me, I tell him the story, and he lets me go. I go to the second floor. The same happens. I go to the third floor, and now a group of mall security guards start walking behind me, but without making contact. By then, I had lost the receipt, or another one of the guards kept it, dunno. I knew they were going to keep harassing me, so I decided to leave the mall and head back to work without lunch. An hour later, I heard one of my coworkers telling the story that something had happened at the mall. Something about a lunatic walking around the mall with a hammer. Too long didn't read. I walked around a mall holding a hammer, and security didn't believe me that I had just bought the damn thing. I think that kind of depends on how he was holding the hammer. If he was just holding the handle of it just at his side, like wielding it, like he's some sort of character in an old school Sega Genesis beat 'em up, that might be suspicious. Maybe if he had his hands around the metal part and letting the handle hang down like it was some sort of, like he was just sort of carrying it utilitarian-like, maybe he wouldn't have been harassed as much. I think he was just holding it by the handle. Story 2. Mine is more a reverse situation. Off-duty police officer caught doing something sus by a sieve. My boyfriend at the time had locked his keys in his car, so I texted my dad, now retired police officer, while I was at school to ask him how to get them out, thinking he'd give me the numbers of some local companies or something. He texted me back asking where the car was parked, so I assumed he was organizing the service on my then-boyfriend's behalf because we were in school, so couldn't make the calls ourselves. About 30 minutes go by, and one of our friends from school who had a free period that morning texts my then-boyfriend to say he saw some big burly dude breaking into his car, but he didn't want to call the police because the dude caught a good look at him and the car he was driving, and he was nervous he'd track him down or something. 10 minutes later, we found out that big burly dude happened to be my dad, when he texted me to say he'd dropped my then-boyfriend's car keys to the front office. He'd managed to find a thin, hard plastic rope-type thing in one of the bins near where the car was parked, used it to slide between the window seal and yank up the door lock. Having to explain to my friends, word got out pretty fast that my then-boyfriend's car was being broken into, that it was actually my dad breaking into the car to help him get out the keys that he locked inside. It was one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had, but it gave my dad some pretty wild street cred. I was wondering if anyone was going to say, as soon as they found out it was her dad that broke into the car, that maybe this retired police officer dad was suspecting the boyfriend of something and was going through it for evidence. So I wouldn't put it past anybody to think that. Story 3. Here we go. Not an officer, but I got a story. I had driven a customer home in her own car, a beautiful brand new BMW, because she was afraid to drive at night. I asked her if she had any family that could help, and she said no. I told her to wait for my break, and I'd ask another employee to follow us in my car so I could get home after. Well, driving towards her home, I was pulled over by the police. I was asked to step out of the car and was escorted to the sidewalk. There were 4 cruisers within a mile all around us. I heard one of the officers asking her if she was okay and if I had hurt her. The officer questioning me asked why I was driving her home and how I planned to get back. I told him the story, pointed to my friend who was pulled over and said, "That's my car." He then asked why I was so nervous, and I replied that I've never been approached by so many officers in such a way. Then I asked what was going on, and he told me that her daughter reported her car stolen because she never stays out that late. When her daughter showed up, she was unfriendly and didn't apologize or say thank you. Then her mother started yelling at her about how she treated her like a child. Apparently, she started showing signs of dementia, but still drove to our place a couple of times a week. Didn't see her again after that night. She was such a sweet woman, and I felt so bad it all ended like that. I got to go back to work and hope no one asked me to do something like that again. I swear that one part where he's asked, "Well, why are you nervous?" "Because you've got all the police force pulling me over. Of course I'm going to be suspicious of you." I don't care where you fall on how you think about cops and law enforcement and what they get away with these days. If you've got more than 2 cops that are pulled over facing you when they're asking you something, you're going to be nervous even if you've done nothing. Story 4. I guess mine isn't so bad. I was the suspect. Back in the early 2000s. I bought a PSP on release day and loaded some MP3 files to it. Walking to work on a long stretch, I pulled my PSP to start some music and slipped it right back into my pocket. 15 minutes into my walk, LAPD swarmed me with guns pointed at me and asked me to get on the ground. I think I was 19 at the time. I got on the ground and one officer dug his knee into my back and asked me if I was carrying any weapons. I said no. He said that a lady had reported me with a weapon in hand. I paused for a moment and then said, I have a PSP in my pocket. Maybe she thought that was a gun? The cop said nothing for like 5 seconds and went right into my pocket and pulled out my PSP. He asked me if I was dealing illicit substances, and I said, "What? No. Why?" He had been scrolling on my machine, wondering what Metal Gear Acid was. Eventually, they let me get up and explain that it was a PlayStation Portable. I just remembered them knocking themselves backwards laughing and driving away without apologizing for my aching back. Story 5. Not a cop, but was stopped by one. Junior year of college. I was taking a biology class where we had to do a phylum project. Go out and gather like 15 different organisms across 15 different phylums. This involved a lot of rooting through bushes for bugs and stuff and throwing them in a big Ziploc bag. So naturally, I was rooting around in bushes on campus. Only problem, it was like 1 a.m. I'm a night person, what can I say? So I'm out with a flashlight, darting in and out of bushes, hoisting around this big old Ziploc bag full of random unidentifiable stuff. Car drives by just as I jump into a set of bushes to grab what looks like a type of cup fungus on a tree. Come back out to find a cop car stopped there and a guy shining his flashlight on me. I apparently looked pretty suspicious. Literally, my first words to the cop were, "Wow, this probably looks really sketch, doesn't it?" Told him about my project. He laughed because he thought I was smuggling a literal Ziploc gallon bag full of illicit substances or something dumb like that. Had a good laugh, wished me good luck, and left me to my bush diving. That was a fun night. Story 6. Too long didn't read? It was Brussels sprouts. I'm the guy who was doing something suspicious, but it kind of fits here. When I used to work at a grocery store, I would get off sometime between 10 p.m. and 12 a.m., and I also preferred to ride my bike most of the year to save on gas. Since work was close to my home and there were a few cars out, I never really bothered with lights. Already suspicious, I know. Right around Thanksgiving, we would get these massive stalks of Brussels sprouts, which, if you have never seen one, they look like something you might find growing on an alien planet. A solid 3 feet of little bulbs at the end of spikes, basically. They were super cheap, so I couldn't pass up such a deal. But of course, the only way for me to transport it home at night was to ride with the stalks sticking a foot out of my backpack. I have no idea what the cops thought it was when they pulled me over. Marijuana? A weapon? They were doing their deal where no one talks to me and the other checks me out from behind when the other one behind me busted out laughing. "Are those Brussels sprouts?" They let me go a minute later. I've biked to work. I've ridden back late at night, and I would take the back streets, and I also wouldn't use a light. And then I got pulled over by a cop saying that was illegal unless I was on the sidewalk or something like that. So, long story short, I got a light so I wouldn't get pulled over by cops on back streets anymore. Story 1. I was on a train heading home and had just had a really long day. I was tired. Nothing went well that day. Got chewed out by my boss for something I wasn't responsible for, and was just done with the day. I sat down, put in my earbuds, and closed my ears for a while. After a while, I could hear a growing ruckus coming from a few seats ahead of me. I rip out one earbud and hear 3 gentlemen, read thugs, giving an old man a hard time. For over 10 minutes, I listened as these punks berated this old man for literally everything and anything. They said he was too old and should do the world a favor and unalive himself, said he contributed nothing to the world, and that he was so weak they'd probably terminate him with one punch. After a while, the old man decided to speak up and said that he was a war veteran and had fought in Vietnam and had accomplished more in his life on this earth than any of these 3 fine scholars would ever hope to do. That's when I reached my tipping point with these kids. After saying this, one of the kids retorts, "I don't give a care about Vietnam. I hope you lost friends back there. I hope you realize that you're responsible for their passings." That's when I lost my cool. I got out of my seat and stormed over there. Now, I'm not a big guy by any means, but I was tired, ticked off, and just finished listening to a healthy dose of metal, so I was a wrecking ball of hostility, rage, and fortitude. I got into these kids' faces and said, "You are perhaps the most ungrateful, selfish, and despicable pieces of scum trash that I've ever seen. The fact that you have the audacity to question this man's service to your country, let alone belittle him for as long as you have, shows me that you have no redeeming qualities as a human being. You are vile, degenerate dog trash, and if you say another word to this man, I will personally throw you off this train. You are a disappointment as a member of my species, and I hope that you realize one day that this tough guy attitude that you're flaunting accomplishing nothing and will one day result in a similar situation like this, but with you getting your face smashed in. Now take a seat and shut up or get off at the next stop. The choice is yours." Now, right after saying this, I realized that I was outnumbered 3-1. However, these 3 young punks were taken aback at the verbal lashing I had just given them and said nothing for what seemed like an eternity. After a while, I realized I had won. The especially heinous one just looked to his feet, turned around, and sat down. His 2 buddies followed suit. The next stop, they got off. Old man thanked me. I thanked him, and I went about my day. I think it just speaks to how awful these 3 people are that there's 3 young kids, and they're acting all tough picking on an old man. I think they think that's an easy target. And I cannot believe how verbose and pretty eloquent this guy that stood up for him actually is. Amazing. Story 2. This wasn't me that did the saving, but rather someone else told off a stranger in place of me. I was working as a lifeguard on a military base when a random spouse of a high-ranking officer came to the pool. She decides that she is above rules and logic, and takes one of these 6-foot-long lounge chairs, the long ones that people sunbathe at pools with, and places it on a 3-foot sidewalk, leaving the last 3 feet to hang over the pool. Now, as a lifeguard, my job is mostly to enforce safety, and that breaks the fire codes, blocks a walking path, and most importantly, it's hanging over the pool. No matter how opposed to rescuing this lovely lady from the pool, I'd still have to rescue her. We inform her that she can't do that and that it's a safety issue. She ignores us, and after 3 times of telling her she cannot do that, we kindly inform her that she must leave the facility. Now, this pool is a free service, so there's not any need to worry about a refund or anything. We just need to get her out of the facility. It's at this point she decides that she is above any of our rules and starts yelling at us. She has several kids, all are too young to stay at the pool by themselves, so we don't wish to call the cops on her at this point. Having mom escorted out of the pool in handcuffs would be rather traumatizing for a young child. At least we guessed so. We try to calm her down and explain that she cannot stay at the pool and must leave now. By this time, the head lifeguard is directly involved in talking to her. She gets more and more aggressive and starts yelling even louder. It's at this point my supervisor decides enough is enough. We need to call the cops to get her escorted from the building. Remember, this is a military base, so we're calling the military police. This was a huge decision on our part. As my lead is dialing, she starts trying to guilt trip us and starts spouting off the usual, "My husband is Colonel so-and-so. You better respect me," and that line of hogwash. She then decides it's time to play things up a notch and screams at us rather loudly, "My husband is currently deployed in Iraq. You're supposed to support the families of deployed people." This got the attention of another guest in the area. This guest had a booming drill sergeant voice, and to add to it, the fact the facility had a nice echo to it as well. He says one line to her, "Curse you, lady! I'm going to Iraq next week." She stops straight, watches him walk out of the entrance. At this point, her mouth is agape, and she walks to her belongings, gathers them, and walks out the door with her kids. My supervisor tells the cop that everything's solved and hangs up the phone. Cool story, bro. I have never been involved in the military, but these stories always amaze me of military spouses that think they are entitled to all the perks of the rank that their spouse has. It's just amazingly delusional. Story 3. My mom and I have a knack for being in these situations. We honestly don't look for them, but we have a lot of weird stories. In high school, I was a lot like you. I was shy, ate outside the library at lunch while reading. I saw 3 girls on my right a few yards away yelling at another girl. The girl being yelled at seemed to be really scared, and the 3 girls loved it. They started grabbing her by the hair and punching her in the face. I ran over and started pushing them off of her. They were confused for a second, but stared at me. I'm 5'2", 110, and the only fights I've ever been in were fake cage matches with my cousins and brothers. Apparently, that was enough, because I was able to fight them off well enough for them to run away. I went to my next class with a swollen lip, beginnings of a black eye, and some bruises, but otherwise fine. There are more stories, but another time I saw a girl getting beat up in her boyfriend's car behind me while I was stopped at a red light. I wanted to get out and beat the hell out of him, but I couldn't as I had my 2-year-old in the car. Instead, I had the cars around stopped, blocking him in. It was easy since everyone saw what was happening. I called 911 and started describing the man and the girl and giving the license plate number. Once he saw me on the phone, he stopped choking his girlfriend and got out of the car to tell me to stop. I hopped back in my car, locked the doors, and watched as another passerby saw that he was coming for my car and started to kick his butt. After the smoke settled, I asked my hero to give me his address. I delivered some baked goods as a thank you. As an ex-Marine, he seemed to like them. Always refer to them as former Marines and not ex-Marines. I work with a former Marine and called him an ex-Marine, and he hasn't let me forget it. We're friends, and calling a Marine an ex-Marine is the worst thing you can do. The only ex-Marines are the ones that have been dishonorably discharged from the Corps. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Awesome stories, though. Yeah, I'll go along with that last one. I was thinking along the lines of like Warhammer K, in that only in passing away does service end. I don't think even then, if someone a Marine has passed away, that they're still considered an ex-Marine. Although, like I said, I've never been in the military. What do you think? Story 1. 2 weeks notice when leaving a workplace. Unless you need to keep on good terms with them, but don't let them treat you like dirt. I was working for a large office building's cafeteria and catering services for 4 years, and after dealing with poor management for so long and rumors it was going to be shut down anyways by decision of the building, I planned to jump ship. I gave my notice and was commuting further because also in the middle of a move, so they made the final first week and a half check. The building was mainly a large newspaper office, other large companies and some smaller ones in this building, and for years I built good relationships with my customers. So it was a surprise, but understanding why I was leaving. I was going to give them the full 2 weeks, but the Friday before the last 3 days, we were closed weekends, one of my lawyer office customers informed me how it isn't a mandatory thing to do. It's more of a polite thing of not wanting to burn bridges, that I didn't need to deal with the place anymore. At this point, I was done. I was so done with it all. I thanked them for the information, and at the end of my shift, said my goodbyes to who I could, and left. That's very much one of those things that you should know. A lot of states have laws called at-will employment, which says that the company can fire you for whatever reason. The only thing that goes in one of the only things that will go in the worker's direction is that they can quit at any time. No need to give 2 weeks notice. It's not a requirement, no matter how much the employer will try to gaslight you into staying. Story 2. Makeup. I used to spend an obscene amount of money on makeup and skincare products. I became disabled and couldn't afford it anymore, and realized I have great skin. The amount of stuff I don't have to buy now is baffling. I don't have to spend hours painting on layers of makeup or dedicate time and money to get my nails and brows done, or feel like a troll when I don't want to dress up to go to the grocery store. Some people might call this letting yourself go, but I disagree. I learned I don't need people to tell me I'm beautiful to be beautiful. I always get told how beautiful my skin is. My hair is naturally graying, and I've decided to just go with it. People ask me, who does my hair? You don't have to buy beauty. Yes, it's fun, and I'm not saying it's bad if someone loves wearing makeup. I'm just saying for me, I was raised to believe that makeup, hair, clothes were beauty. You bought beauty. It's absolutely optional. And you, yes, you reading this right now, you are freaking beautiful. Stop letting other people dictate what you see in the mirror. I will always have respect for people that put on makeup and put it on well. I have drawn, I have painted. I have never had to paint on my own face and have it look good. Never had to do that, so there's skill involved. Story 3. This is stupid, but recording odometer readings and how much gas you buy. Growing up, every time we filled up the car, my dad, an extremely meticulous engineer, would write down the odometer reading, how much gas he bought, and how much he paid for it on the receipt. He had my mom do the same thing when she filled up the car. I assumed this was something required of adults, like doing taxes. Once I had my own car, I did the same thing for a long time, until I realized that not only was this data not required by the government, but literally nobody except my dad cared. It felt surprisingly liberating to just throw the receipt in the trash or the glove box and forget about it. My father-in-law did this. I found out that at one point he had a car that had a broken fuel gauge. He didn't know how it was broken and ended up stranded on the side of the road for 2 days or something. From that day forward, he always meticulously tracked the mileage when filling up. Now, it's not required, but there was a time when I was driving that I did keep track. I was actually keeping track of the mileage, what kind of mileage I was getting on the car. But at this point, there was an app where you could enter all that stuff and have it do it for you, so it wasn't as painful as writing things down by hand and doing math manually. Story 4. Keeping family members in your life. I have some pretty frickin' bat-scat crazy family. Grandma and great-grandma were tough, scary, crazy. My aunt is nuts. Like slapped me so hard when I was 8 I couldn't walk for a few days. Like come to our house and fist fight my mom nuts. I ended up working for my aunt and uncle. I thought all jobs just treated people like hell, but my wife helped me realize the truth. My crazy, confrontational, controlling family members knew I didn't think there was anything else, and as long as they kept me in that mindset, I'd never leave or fight back. I tried to end things peacefully when I got another job, but they prevented that from happening, so I don't have any contact with them anymore. It's kind of cool that you can just be like, you're a terrible person and I don't want you around my wife or daughter, So don't let the door hit you on the way out, because I don't want crazy prints on my door. Story 5. Adding increasing responsibility to life as I get older and doing the grown-up things that everyone else starts doing as they mature. At 27, I was happy with my solo, no-debt life in my paid-for house, with my low-responsibility job doing the frugal things that gave me joy. By 33, I was on the road to 17 years of a marriage to a spender, increasingly large houses/mortgages, expensive vacations, ridiculous amounts of spending on dining/drinks out several nights per week, miserably climbing my way up the white-collar ladder, going to dinner parties, blah, blah, blah. Blew the whole thing up 3 years ago. Now, live the same life I did at 27, in the same old condo nonetheless. Happier than a pig in poop. Couldn't give two shoots if everyone thinks I'm a man-child. Story 6. Having an opinion about something. Sometimes you just don't know. Does God exist? I don't know. Are humans destined to fail at governing one another? I don't know. Is cereal soup? I don't know. And when asked about something, don't hogwash an answer. I don't know is a perfectly valid response, or there is an answer, I just don't know it off the top of my head is also fine. I used to have the nervous habit of when asked a question I didn't know the answer to try and just talk it through and maybe try and form an opinion as I was responding. It's a perfectly legitimate thing to say, I don't know, as in, I have no knowledge of this subject, and I could not tell you anything about it. It would be disingenuous to talk about it when I literally have no knowledge of it. Story 7. Pregnancy and having kids. Yes, I'm serious. Until I was taught better by my therapist, of all people, at age 16, I really did not know pregnancy isn't something that just happens. All I got from my family was the stay away from boys speech. I wasn't taught how it happens, so I lived in fear I'd wake up pregnant one day and could do nothing about it. It was a huge relief when my therapist explained otherwise. Yeah, sex ed didn't exist in the schools I attended, and I went to 4 school districts, New Jersey, 1999 to 2013, though my family still treats it as something inevitable, which I feel explains a lot about my family's circumstances. Now you have an excuse for when they ask why you don't have kids. Story 8. Being able to say no, even if it hurts other people's feelings. I always thought I knew this and had good boundaries until about a year ago when someone pointed out to me that even though I intellectually know this, that I often do things I don't want to do, especially in close relationships, and that emotionally, the idea of hurting other people's feelings has felt a bit intolerable to me. I've been practicing saying no and being more of myself since. The advice that changed this for me was, people will have their feelings and you will have your feelings, and they don't need to be the same. Before I say no, I often repeat this to myself. It's like the mental mantra equivalent of the superhero stance for me. Story 9. When I was in 2nd grade, I was doing homework, and there was this one question, I can't remember what it was, about division. I cried for hours because I didn't understand. It turns out that all you had to do was estimate while my dumb butt was trying to solve a whole dang problem. The worst thing is when you're doing those big equations, which almost always end up with a single-digit result, and you make a small mistake, like put a minus instead of a plus when rewriting the equation, and now an entire hour of wasted time until you realize that these numbers are suspiciously too hard. I'm having a little trouble getting by this one. Was it the point of the assignment that you had to estimate? I mean, in division, they told you about how to get the right answer on this. There were usually answers that did not require estimation. I'm having a little trouble following this. Do you know what it means? Let me know in the comments. Story 1. Found an old discarded amp on the street with a post that said, broken, need some love. It was an old Marantz tuner. A good brand, a good model. I picked it up on the way to my friend's place, and I told him, this'll be your Christmas gift. And he just laughed at me. Thought I couldn't make it work. So I brought it back home, checked it out. Turned out that all it needed was a bit of contact cleaner in strategic places. I built 2 bookshelf, speakers out of scrap wood that another friend had. The drivers and electronic components were pretty cheap. I capped it off with a used CD player still in amazing condition and a used turntable that worked just fine. All in all, I must have spent like $100. I built my friend an awesome stereo chain that he was so surprised when I delivered it. For me, it was an awesome project. It was the best gift I ever gave away, and it was really fun. Especially since before then, all he had was an awful radio/CD and like 5 CDs and no aux input, so we always ended up listening to music on phone speakers. Also, my copy of NES Tetris is the Tengen version that was only available in stores for like 2 weeks in North America, apparently. It's kind of rare, and I've heard it's worth quite a bit with the original box and everything. Those Marantz are so dang expensive now with the vinyl resurgence. I bought mine for my record player a while back on Craigslist for about $100, and it's about $500 to $600 on eBay now. Well, of course, I'm going to focus on the one paragraph about the video game because that's my expertise. Tengen is definitely worth something, especially with the original box and all the stuff in it. Tengen was not only trying to circumvent everybody and bring Tetris to the world first, they were trying to get past Nintendo's permission to make cartridges for the NES. It's a great story if you look it up. Story 2. Saw someone selling a copy of Chrono Trigger for SNES about 20 years ago. It was a great price, and the dude said for another $10, he'd throw in a bunch of other games he didn't want, including Star Fox. I was trying to start a collection at the time and figured he'd give me a box of sports games and junk you usually see filling pawn shops, etc. But I figured, it's $10, so agreed. He gave me the box and thanked me for taking all the stuff off his hands. I got in the car and looked through the games, and there were a bunch of bad sports games and a few other meh games. But amidst it all was this game that said Star Fox Weekend on it. I was like, what the hell is that? Check eBay, and the thing was selling for like $300 at the time. It's like a rare SNES cartridge they gave out to winners of a competition, or to other people who won one from Nintendo Power, etc. I couldn't bring myself to bring it back or tell him. 10 years later, I saw some lady on Craigslist looking for a copy of Chrono Trigger for her son for Christmas. I emailed her that I had it, and when she came to grab it, I just gave it to her free to pay back the karma of getting that super rare game in a $10 box of junk. The thing goes for like $1,000 on eBay now. I can't find my SNES and it's driving me nuts. So many games. Final Fantasy III, Super Mario RPG, Super Mario World, Mario Kart. I could probably replace them all without breaking the bank completely, but I'm not sure if I'd even want them. I know about some rare cartridges, especially like ones that were used for live competitions for the Nintendo. I gotta look up Star Fox Weekend. That sounds like a very rare one. There are a few like that were only available in rental stores that end up going for big bucks now. Story 3. When I was a little kid, I liked to climb under and hide inside the rack of clothes when my mom was shopping. One time, I found what I thought was one of those cheap 25-cent plastic rings that you put a quarter into the machine and it spits out. I think that was basically my only understanding of what a ring was at that age. But I showed my mom what I had found, and as it turns out, it was a massive diamond engagement ring. I specifically remember that it had tape around it, which my mom explained was probably because it was too big, and whoever was wearing it was trying to make it more snug for their finger. We gave it to the teenage girls who were working the cash register, hoping the person who lost it would return looking for it, and it would get returned. My mom said she kind of regrets doing that because she thinks that the girls probably pawned it and split the cash. Probably should have taken it to the police or something, but who knows? I like to think that it did make its way back to its rightful owner. Should have asked to put a flyer on the window for a missing ring and your mom's number, so she could ask the callers for a description of the ring and give it to the first person who said it had tape on it. Yeah, I can see that. I think it would have been better for something that valuable. Give it to the police. I mean, with all the retail workers not getting the pay that they deserve, I wouldn't put it past them to pawn that ring. I mean, they were probably, it could just have easily been used to, the money could have been used to just go party, but it could also have gone to pay rent or food. So, yeah, you probably should have given it to the police. Story 4. A few years ago, I was looking through the Goodwill website that lets you bid on stuff that you find. I stumbled across one on the Texas Goodwill's page, and then saw an auction for a huge box of phone accessories that no one was bidding on. I started looking through all the pictures, started researching some of the brands, and started realizing the whole box was worth a decent bit. I took a shot and made my bid. Someone else saw what I saw and started a bidding war with me, but I eventually won with a bid of $106, then $24 for shipping. Few days go by, and I finally get the box. Well, 2 boxes, and they were both huge. Started taking inventory and ended up with 100 phone chargers, 100 Android chargers, about 250 iPhone 8 cases in all different styles, 80 battery packs, a few iPad cases, and about 1,000 screen protectors. Turned my $130 total investment into an eBay business and made almost $8,000 in about 9 months. Shop Goodwill has a lot more watchers than it used to, and they do a much better job of price-checking stuff. It's kind of unfortunate. Story 5. My friends and I were at a concert and found this broken bracelet under a merch table as we were about to leave the venue. It had an interesting engraving on it. Something about being a son and a friend. Because it was broken, we were thinking about just tossing it, but ended up throwing it in our backpack to bring it to the office later. My friend worked at the venue, so she was going to turn it in. The next week, I was browsing online on a thread of the same kind of music we were listening to at the show, and just as I was about to fall asleep, someone's post caught my eye. It said something like, "This is a long shot, but I lost something," and it piqued my interest, so I clicked it. It was someone from that same show asking if anyone had found a silver bracelet. Turns out it was the same one we found, and it seemed to be a special gift from the person's parents, and they were looking for it. We connected and got the bracelet returned to the guy. And the whole interaction is actually in my online history. It's a fun, albeit quick read. Story 6. My dad and I are both mechanics and DIYers. We both try to see how many tools we can find on the side of the road. It's shocking how many things are left behind at work sites or else fall off of trucks. A few things we found: 2 framing hammers, 2 measuring tapes, a 40-inch push broom, various ratchet straps, a functional fluke multimeter, a 5-foot crowbar, and various other odds and ends. Always keep your eyes peeled. Sometimes this pastime can be dangerous when it involves pulling over on the highway, so be careful. You'd think there would be a buttload of random 10mm sockets lining the roadways, but I've never found one. I've lost at least 6 of them, though, in some ungodly nether dimension hidden deep beneath the engines of yesteryear. I'm not a mechanic guy. I have a friend who's a mechanic guy, and that stuff is expensive. I can't believe this stuff would get left behind. I'm surprised that they just don't have a very specific list checking off everything they have before they take it with them. Especially if there's a job where you have to bring your own tools. Story 7. When I was younger, I would rummage around the drawers and cabinets in my grandmother's house, just adventuring and discovering, which is what I called it. I happened to find this old folded piece of paper, but it only took 3 seconds for me to just disregard it and push it aside. I think I was trying to get something else that I saw. After I finished with whatever I had, I picked up the piece of paper to throw it away. Out of childlike curiosity, I opened it up and saw the words in it. It looked like a letter. It seemed important, so I gave it to my grandmother, who gave it to my mother when she came to pick me up. My grandmother is blind. Come to find out, it was a love letter from my grandfather to my grandmother. That really made their day.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.